Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's session on budgeting for crowdfunding. My name is Teresa Hubbard, and I'm a program specialist for fiscal sponsorship here at Fractured Atlas. A few housekeeping things that I just wanted to mention before we get started are I will leave some time for questions at the end. So if you have questions along the way, feel free to type them into the question box, but I will probably answer them closer to the end of the session. I also am recording this session so that I can send you a recording afterwards. So if you feel like you missed something or you know there's something that you want to go over at a different point, that's totally cool and expected, and you can refer back to the recording that I send you once it's complete. If at any point you can't hear me or the screen goes blank or something technical seems to be happening, feel free to type that into the question box as well. I'll try to keep an eye on that so that I can adjust accordingly if necessary. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So for anyone who is unfamiliar, Fractured Atlas is a nonprofit technology company that works with artists. We work with artists and arts organizations in all different disciplines across the country. Our mission is to help out artists by providing online business tools that they can use for their arts business. I'll tell you a little bit more about our programs and services at the end of the presentation, but I wanted to point out a few numbers here for you. Through our programs, we work with more than 58,000 members, nearly 4,000 fiscally sponsored projects who have raised more than $100 million since the program began, and we've secured more than 16,000 insurance policies and served more than 500,000 artists across the country. So somebody is asking if they should be seeing more than graphics. Nope, you'll just be seeing, right now, do you see numbers on the screen that says 58,021 members? Okay, perfect. So yep, you're seeing exactly the right thing. Thanks for checking on that. So today you're here to learn about budgeting for crowdfunding. I'm going to talk first about the importance of budgets and what they include, and then we'll dive into how it relates to your crowdfunding campaign. Keep in mind that with any project you're producing, one of the first things you want to start with is a budget. But what is a budget? A budget is a financial document used to project future income and expenses. The budgeting process may be carried out by projects to estimate whether the project can continue to operate with its projected income and expenses. And processes vary for creating a budget, but typically entail listing all sources of monthly income, including contributed and earned income, listing any required fixed expenses like rent, utilities, phone, and so on, and listing other possible and variable expenses. It's important that your budget incorporates both income and expenses so that you can plan for a balance between the two. You'll also note that a budget is a projection of future expenses. It acts as a guide for your finances throughout the specified period of time, but it is very likely that it'll change. So why is budgeting important? There are a number of reasons. Budgeting can help you do quite a few things, including understanding and tracking how much is spent on various programs or projects. It helps you connect expenditures to the revenues that result from those expenditures, and it can help you cope with cash flow issues. A budget can also help you determine whether your fundraising efforts cost more money than they generate, which is, not ideal. And it can help you decide who is going to be involved and when, and it can potentially help you plan for an emergency. Today, I'm going to focus on a budget that is specific to your crowdfunding campaign. Keep in mind that coming up with your goal for your crowdfunding campaign is one of the most important aspects to reaching success. A crowdfunding budget reflects your project's financial needs in order to ensure you gain the confidence of potential donors. It helps you, it allows for you to plan for the actual costs of running the campaign, and it can ensure that you end up with the amount you need for the project at the end of the campaign. So let's say you're going to have a crowdfunding campaign for a theater performance you're planning on producing in a park next spring. I mentioned earlier that a budget typically involves both income and expenses. Some people use crowdfunding to cover the entire cost of a project, while others use it only to cover a portion of their project. It's up to you to determine what is the right approach for you. In this situation, we're going to plan to crowdfund for the overall project expenses for that theater production that'll be happening in the spring. The expenses for this project include a variety of things. Some are related to the actual production of the piece, and some are fundraising costs. You should include both in your crowdfunding budget. If you're offering rewards or perks, make sure you estimate the costs and include them in your budget as well. So, we're going to go through a few steps that can help you estimate the costs, but also to really show you what to keep in mind when you're creating your crowdfunding budget. So step one is to be cautious when choosing what incentives to offer. Non-material incentives like digital or experiential perks or benefits are less expensive to produce and allow you to save on shipping costs, which greatly reduces the impact on your budget. Otherwise, you want to go for low cost merchandise that is easy to ship at a low cost. An example of this might be swag for your work. If you're creating tote bags or t-shirts already, these are low cost incentives that you could send to somebody for not very much shipping. But of course, don't forget about shipping costs. If your campaign will be open to contributors from around the world, make sure that international shipping costs won't outweigh the contributions you receive. Consider limiting the incentives available to international contributors to non-material incentives, or charging a small shipping fee if international contributors would like to receive any material incentives you have offered. Either way, it is important to consider both domestic and international shipping when estimating your shipping costs. Don't forget to include the cost of packaging when estimating shipping costs, and if possible, try to include an additional shipping fee for contributors located internationally to help cover expensive international shipping costs. Keeping these shipping costs in mind, your donors will be especially impressed if you absorb the cost of shipping yourself and factor that into your budget as well. So if they don't have to pay the extra shipping costs, they'll be extra excited for the perk that you're going to offer them. So step two is to figure out exactly how much it will cost to produce that awesome merchandise or host that cool launch party before you promise them to your contributors. You should also factor in the cost of the time and effort associated with the fulfillment process once the campaign closes. So you'll be paying people potentially to actually fulfill these things, and you want to make sure that you are factoring their time and energy into your budget as well. Step three is to estimate how many incentive packages at each contribution level you will need to fulfill. Are you only going to offer 5 at one level, maybe 10 at another? You want to make sure that you are setting this up front so that you can incorporate those costs into your crowdfunding budget. And remember that it's best to overestimate than to underestimate, as long as you remain realistic. So be sure to play it safe, making estimates using a worst case scenario approach. And then step four is about choosing the levels and making sure that you limit the higher levels. You're likely to receive a much greater number of contributions at lower level. This is sort of just a crowdfunding fact. The most popular contribution level is about $25. So make sure those incentives are the least costly to fulfill. You may also want to limit the number of incentive packages you make available at higher contribution levels in order to keep your costs down, especially if you are offering something that has a high value or would cost a lot to produce. The largest expense associated with your crowdfunding process also happens to be the hardest set of costs to estimate and to track. The largest expense is the cost of marketing and promoting your campaign. Here are some items you should count on in your marketing cost estimates. Promotional materials, such as a campaign video, press releases, etc. Good quality promotional materials are an essential ingredient for a successful campaign. This is one area where cutting costs and cutting corners will not benefit you or your campaign, so make sure you budget for it. That doesn't mean you can't do them yourself. It just means that you should factor in your time as an expense to create these materials, not to mention factoring in the cost of the materials if that's the case. One of the most unanticipated and arguably most costly marketing expenses is the cost of managing an ongoing engagement with your support community before, during, and after your campaign. You may need to hire a new resource to manage your community engagement, or you may opt to take on the opportunity cost of shifting yours and others' resources time away from working on the actual project in order to manage the community. Either way, you will need to estimate how much human resource time it will take and the cost in real dollars and in dollars of that time in order to build those costs into your fundraising goal. It's important to factor in the cost of the various fees associated with running your campaign as well. Given that your campaign could be subject to fees that amount to as much as 10% or more of the funds you raise, you need to set a funding goal that allows you to cover the costs of fees and still leaves you with the necessary funds for your project. The typical fees you can expect to pay are platform fees. Platform fees are typically 2 to 5% of the funds raised, although they can be as high as 10% in some cases. A good example is with Indiegogo and Kickstarter, they both charge 5%, but they also pass along credit card fees that can increase that 5% to closer to 8 to 10% of the total raised. Some platforms will charge different rates depending on whether or not your campaign successfully reaches its funding goal, charging more if the campaign falls short. So as always, it's best to use the worst case scenario and calculate the estimated platform fees using the highest possible rate. You also want to consider payment processing fees, like I mentioned before. Beware of additional payment processing fees when calculating your campaign costs. In many cases, the funds you raise could be subject to additional fees on top of those charged by your platform of choice. Some platforms charge an additional fee for credit card processing, whereas in other cases, the platform's payment partner, like Amazon Payments or PayPal or whatever processor they're using, charges an additional processing fee. These fees generally amount to 2 to 4% of the contribution payments processed. And in the vast majority of these cases, the campaign owner is the one responsible for paying the processing fees, not the contributor. So this will not be included necessarily. In a lot of cases, your contributor, your donor, will not have the opportunity to cover the fee depending on what platform you use. And don't forget that any funds you raise through a crowdfunding platform may be considered taxable income. It is important to factor the possible taxes you will have to pay when you set your funding goal. You will want to set a goal that allows you to cover this expense. The IRS has not provided guidance on how to treat this income, so it's best if you reach out to an accountant to help you determine this. There are many factors that go into determining the amount that is taxable. So speaking with your accountant beforehand about your specific tax situation is your best bet. It's possible that you'll be able to offset this income with business expenses, but it's also possible that this type of funding doesn't work that way. So it's always best to to reach out to your accountant beforehand just to make sure that you're on the same page before you start collecting money. And as with anything, unexpected expenses are bound to arise during your crowdfunding process. It's a good idea to include a small contingency amount in your budget just in case. A good rule of thumb for determining the size of your contingency fund is to calculate it at about 10 to 15% of your campaign costs. The more confident you feel in your estimates and the more you use a worst case scenario approach when estimating all your campaign expenses, the smaller you can make your contingency fund. But again, it's always best to err on the side of slightly over budgeting, as crowdfunding campaigns can move in fairly unpredictable directions that can lead to unexpected costs. So remember, your ultimate objective is to set a realistic funding goal that represents the true costs of your project. However, your funding goal also needs to account for any costs and deductions associated with the campaign process so that the net amount you are left with after all expenses and deductions is enough to cover your actual project costs and allow it to make it to its completion. In your crowdfunding budget, there will likely be two types of income. You'll receive donations from the individual donors to the campaign. The other area you can consider getting income is as in-kind gifts. Will you or your team members be contributing their time to the campaign? Are you getting any of the perks donated? Are you throwing a party in the middle of the campaign that is mainly from donated items such as space, food, drink, entertainment, etc.? These are the different types of income that you're going to receive, and so that's a good idea to factor that in when considering your budget. So now that you've come up with a number for how much the campaign is going to cost you and how much you need for the project, you should think realistically about where this money is going to come from and how much people can give. Make a list of everyone you plan to ask and how much you think they'll give. Don't forget your friends, family, coworkers, acquaintances, projects or artists similar to yours, art lovers, and everyone else. Be realistic in how much you think they'll give. Total up this number. And if it is drastically different than the expense number you came up with, you may need to consider lowering your campaign goal and finding other sources to make up for the budget difference. The graphic that you see right now is a good example of the different types of groups that give to a crowdfunding campaign. You'll start with your nearest and dearest, your family, friends, coworkers, and then you'll branch out from there, hopefully growing into your network and asking for funds from acquaintances or organizational partners, and then beyond that is industry supporters, and beyond that is the rest. The idea is you're trying to tap into different networks for all of your team members, but also your supporters in order to make that funding pool grow. So here's an example. In this scenario, you'll need to go outside of crowdfunding to find the additional $5,000. Can you earn this through ticket sales? Is there any grant funding or corporate support you can get? Is there any way to get in-kind contributions for the project? Don't feel like you need to raise all of the funds in one place. And in a lot of cases, raising funds from various sources and diverse sources is going to be the best way to make your project happen. And if it's an ongoing project, to make that project sustainable. So don't forget, if you go through this budgeting process and decide on a lower goal than the expenses you estimated, make sure you adjust your budget numbers accordingly to reflect the change in crowdfunding costs to project costs based on the lower goal. Here is a breakdown of income by type for your fiscally sponsored projects since the beginning of our program. You'll see that individuals have contributed the most funds over time, but there are also sources there are also other sources of revenue out there. So don't get discouraged when you're setting up your fundraising budget and you realize that you need to also raise funds elsewhere. We can help you figure out this plan. It might be sort of like I mentioned before that you're raising most of your budget from individuals, but you need to also look to foundation or corporate support in order to raise the rest of those funds. So that's about it as far as the budgeting section goes. But before I open it up for questions, I quickly wanted to mention our other programs and services. Fractured Atlas is a member-based organization. So if you're interested in using our services, here is a simple overview of membership and some of the perks it can provide. There is a free community level of membership, which allows one user for that free membership. There's a professional level, which is $10 a month and allows one user for the membership. And then there's the organizational level, which allows up to 3 users and is $20 a month. These last two, the professional and organizational levels, allow you access to fiscal sponsorship. So if anyone, I've mentioned fiscal sponsorship once or twice throughout this campaign. If anyone is not unfamiliar, fiscal sponsorship is a legal agreement between a 501c3 like Fractured Atlas and an individual or an organization or a collective that is not a 501c3. And the fiscal sponsorship extends some of the benefits of Fractured Atlas's 501c3 status to artists and arts organizations. And by doing this, they can solicit tax-deductible donations from individuals, sponsorship from corporations, and grants from foundations, which would typically only otherwise be available to nonprofits. Once you're a paid member, you'll be able to access the fiscal sponsorship application. The most important parts of the application are the artistic component of your project and its public benefit. So fiscal sponsorship is ideal if you are an individual artist trying to seek support for your arts practice, if you are a new or small arts organization that wants a training wheels period before deciding if you want to pursue your own nonprofit status, and if a for-profit arts enterprise that wants to seek both investors who plan to share in the profits of your work and nonprofit donors who want to make the tax-deductible donation. These are the 3 scenarios. These are the 3 most common scenarios, but there are other reasons also for people to come to us. But the mechanism of fiscal sponsorship is such that a donor or an institution makes their contribution directly to the 501c3 organization. So in our case, a donor who wanted to support your work would make a credit card donation on our website or write a check out to Fractured Atlas. We then issue the donor a tax receipt and hold the donation in a fund restricted for your project's use. You then request the funds from us and we disperse them to you in the form of a grant. Fiscal sponsorship is a great way to turn those fans we've been talking about into donors. Our next program is Space Finder. For artists, the process of finding workspace can be frustrating and inefficient. Meanwhile, venues have limited resources to spend finding new renters. Earned revenue is critical for creative venues, yet many rental spaces are tragically underutilized. Through the Space Finder program, Fractured Atlas is increasing visibility of rental options, helping artists find the space they need, and helping venues promote and rent their spaces. There are over 5,000 spaces listed and 554,000 searches for space every year. There are also $800,000 and more in annual rental referrals to participating creative venues. Space Finder is available is available in these locations or coming to them soon. The ones that are in italics are the ones where it'll be live soon. So we will be launching in Baltimore, Nashville, Utah, and so on. Thanks to the combined purchasing power of the Fractured Atlas community, our members have access to high-quality coverage for much lower rates than would otherwise be possible through our insurance program. More importantly, With one foot in the arts and another in the world of insurance, we've worked with some of the world's leading insurance companies to design a number of proprietary insurance programs that are specifically tailored to meet your specific needs as an artist or as an arts organization. We've even made the process as quick and painless as possible since all of our applications are online. And lastly, Artfully is an online system to manage your tickets, donations, and contacts. It's a simple, elegant way to keep track of events, people, and your everyday work. You can sell tickets on your site or through an Artfully storefront, which syncs and your Artfully account will sync MailChimp lists, sync contacts, and provides ticket buyers and donors with automatic email receipts, among other things to manage tickets and your patrons. This is a really helpful tool when you're fundraising because you can keep track of all of the people that you're reaching out to ask for a donation and note when you've contacted them, how you've contacted them, and whether or not it produced any results. The other good news is that Artfully works with fiscally sponsored projects, and it's a pretty seamless integration. So you can track your donors and other fans all in the same place. It's a great way to start managing your audience and managing your segments. So I'm going to open it up now for questions. I see a few have come in, and feel free to continue sending more as I answer these ones. Does it matter what platform we use to do a crowdfunding campaign? Generally, no. But if you would like for your donations through your crowdfunding campaign to be tax deductible, then you will have to use Indiegogo. Because Fractured Atlas has a partnership with Indiegogo that allows for that connects to our fiscal sponsorship program, so that if you're fiscally sponsored by Fractured Atlas and you set up an Indiegogo campaign connected to your fiscal sponsorship, you all of the donations that come through it will come to Fractured Atlas, we'll issue tax receipts for your donors. We do need to review and approve, and we'll even launch the campaign. So it's a good idea to be in touch with us several days before you'd like to go live so that we have time to review it without pushing back your launch date. I'm also interested in GoFundMe, but have never used it before. I'm raising funds for completion of a documentary film, Resurrecting Love, on race and reconciliation. So again, you're welcome to use GoFundMe, but the funds raised would not be tax deductible for your donors. So you would just be subject to their terms and conditions when collecting the donations. If you wanted for the funds to be fiscally to be tax deductible through the fiscal sponsorship program, you would need to use Indiegogo and connect your campaign to Fractured Atlas. Somebody is asking what about Florida, but I'm not exactly sure what about Florida it is. So if you wanted to rephrase that question, I'd be happy to answer it for you. Can I use Artfully if I'm using Indiegogo? Yes, Artfully is completely separate from Indiegogo, and it serves a different function. You are not processing, you're not running a crowdfunding campaign on Artfully, but you would be on Indiegogo. So you would actually collect the funds through Indiegogo, and if you are fiscally sponsored, then the donations through the connected campaign would show up on your Artfully account automatically. But if you were using Indiegogo separate of Fractured Atlas and separate of the fiscal sponsorship, then you could certainly download a list of the people who have backed your campaign and upload them into Artfully. And the Artfully team could certainly help you do that. Do you have anything to say about stretch goals and how to use them effectively? The best way to use stretch goals is to be completely transparent about how you will raise any funds that are beyond the goal that you've posted. So if you post a goal of $5,000 and you see that you're at like 4,950, it's likely that you're going to exceed your goal. And when you get to that point, it's not a bad idea to say to your contributors, thanks so much for donating so far. We are nearing our goal, and I just want to let you know that if we pass our goal, we would be able to do X, Y, and Z, or we'd be able to pay these people more, or something like that. It's really just best to be very transparent about how those funds will actually be used, and post it right on your campaign page, and let anybody know who's already given how those funds will be used. So I already answered that question. Any advice or resources on figuring out work visa and related fees to bring artists to the US from overseas? I don't actually know how much that costs, and since this presentation is about budgeting, that's really the as much as I can say about it that's relevant to this topic. I would encourage you to reach out. Fractured Atlas does have a visa program, so if you wanted any information about that, I would encourage you to contact us to figure out how we can help and sort of pick our brains about what it is that we know. Oh, so the Florida question was about Space Finder. I do not believe there are plans to go to Florida at this time, but that doesn't mean that our expansion won't go there eventually. Okay, so here's another question. Also, do you have anything to say on how to determine the line for perceived realistic goal versus something that the public is unlikely to fund because it seems to be too high a goal for the project? For example, an artist raising $10,000 plus just to record, not release an album. I mean, if you're concerned about whether or not your backers are going to believe your goal, it's not uncommon to actually list out the expenses that you plan to incur. It doesn't make sense in all cases, but in the case that perhaps you're recording an album, it's not a bad idea to say, that the studio is going to be $5,000 for the 5 days that we need to rent it, and the equipment rental is going to be this much, and so on. So being, again, transparent about how you'll spend those funds is the most tried and true way to convey convey to your audience that the goal is realistic. That's really the best advice I can give. The other thing is to encourage questions. Give them your contact information so that you can answer any questions about it. Let them know that you're willing to have this conversation with them and to share information, and that you're not hiding anything. That's the thing. There's no real line for perceived realistic goal, because you see people raise hundreds of thousands of dollars on crowdfunding campaigns, but that's not entirely realistic. So if you're doing a project like recording a CD, I'm pretty sure that they've seen higher goals than the $10,000 that you just mentioned. But again, as long as you're transparent about it, you're more likely to get your donors on board for that amount. So that seems to be the end of the question. I will hang out here for a few more minutes to get any last minute ones. Another one just came in. Any tips for identifying prospective donors and their likely donation budgets? The best place to start is by looking at your own audience, your existing audience, looking at your nearest and dearest, and sort of just starting with the trends. I mentioned that the most commonly claimed value or perk value is $25. So making sure that you're making people who can donate at that level comfortable with donating at that level. Make it known that it's appreciated, and all funds are, even if it's just $1, are being helpful toward are helping toward you reaching your budget. If you wanted to look into prospecting, we did have another webinar last night about growing your audience, which may give you some better information about this, but you can do things like look up the value of their home, and you can look at how much they've given to other organizations if that information is public. There are a lot of different sites out there that can help you determine who is sort of a high value donor. I think probably the best thing for me to do would be to send you the audience building webinar if once that recording is complete, so that you can sort of explore some of those prospecting tools. So somebody is asking if the webinar will be available to view after completion. Yes, I did record this webinar, so I can send a recording to you after once I've converted it to YouTube and everything. So it looks like we've run out of questions. If anybody needs to go, you're welcome to. I'll hang out here for a few more minutes in case other questions trickle in. But if you plan to sign off, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I hope that this was helpful, and you can keep an eye out for an email from me with a link to the recording. Thanks, and have a great afternoon.